Thanks, Charlie. All right, well, my name is Steve Lee, as Charlie said. I do have attended classes here at University of Texas at Dallas in the doctoral program. I've also taught at Presswood Christian Academy for about 17 years. I've taught at Mountain View College and Collin College, and I teach classes on apologetics, philosophy of religions. One of the classes I teach is world religions, which is a sort of a survey class. But one of the things I noticed about our culture, and maybe you've noticed this too about our culture, is when people cuss. Have you ever noticed when they cuss, they only use Christian terms? Have you ever noticed that? Like GD, or you can go straight to, where they send you, or Jesus Christ, but they're not praying to him. And I felt sort of bad, being a teacher of world religions, that the other religions don't get to, participate in any foul language. So I actually have come up with some cuss words so that other religions can participate in the foul language. The Christians, that they use Christian terms, hopefully Christians don't use it, and so I wanted to share them with you, because knowing that you're, been in class all day and things like that, you're probably going to zone out. And if you're going to zone out, I want you thinking about, these other, cuss words they use in other religions, like Buddha dang it. Or if like you're texting someone, you put OMA, oh my Allah, kind of thing. Like, oh my, it's like OMG, or just like you can go straight to Nirvana is where you can go. Or holy Shiva. It's a good one right there. Or you could go holy Shiite, but you really got to pronounce that one correctly. So you can be careful on that one. My personal favorite, Joseph Smith. So apparently she liked that one. She liked that one. No. So if you're zoning out on me tonight, please don't. But if you are going to zone out, maybe you could think of some, cuss words so that other religions can participate, in the foul language of our culture. I'm just kidding there. I do teach philosophy of religion and apologetics. And my research is in the historical evidence for the resurrection. That's what I look at. Philosophy of history is what I actually focus on. So the question I'm going to be looking at tonight is this one right here. Did Jesus rise from the dead? And so this is a question. We have to analyze what is this question actually asking? Did Jesus rise from the dead? It is actually a historical question, is what I'm actually going to affirm tonight. And since it's a historical question, it requires us to do historical investigation, is what we have to do. Now, in order to do this, I have to sort of teach you, how do we actually find out what happened in the past? I don't know about you, but when I was in high school, maybe you did this too, but I would sort of zone out. And I would they'd be telling me about, Washington crossing the Potomac, or just different historical events, right? Or Caesar crossing the Rubicon or whatever. And I would sit there and say to myself, how do they really know this happened? I mean, I know this teacher's pretty old, but he wasn't there. He's not that old, so how do they know it actually happened? And I actually imagined that they could have made all this stuff up just to keep us busy in history class. So some of you are like, yeah, that's exactly what they did, because I hate history class. But no, that's not what they did. So in order for me to answer the question, did Jesus rise from the dead, I have to go into the issue of, how do we actually know what happened in the past at all? So that's what I'm going to look at, is how is history done? There's two things an historian does. One is they establish what's called historical facts, or historical truths. Things that we know happened in the past. And then the second thing they do is they provide the best explanation, is what they do. And quite honestly, being an historian, believe it or not, is like being a detective. I mean, imagine a detective that comes onto a crime scene. What is the first thing that detective does? They begin to gather clues. Right? They look at what happened, maybe there's a dead body on the scene, right? And they look at the blood spattering. I know this is getting really morbid for Resurrection Week, right? Kind of thing, but there's a blood spattering, it's face down, there's a knife in the back, there's a pool of blood, maybe some, traces of footprints with blood stains walking away, and there's multiple stab wounds into the back, See, these are all clues. Now, before they can solve the crime, they have to gather all the clues first. Because if they try to solve the crime, then they're going to prematurely determine what happens. You gather the clues first. That's establishing the historical facts. So as a historian, you look at all the historical facts available to you, and then after you gather all your clues or historical facts, then you make the best explanation that explains all those facts. So how does a historian do this first task, establishing historical facts? There are 4 conditions that need to be established to establish historical facts. I know that when you showed up tonight, you wanted to learn how a historian did their job. That's exactly why you showed up tonight at Res Week, here at UTD. No, seriously, this is how a historian actually does their jobs. I mean, you're definitely get your tuition money's worth, this year. All right, so there are 4 conditions that have to be met for a historian to determine if that event happened in the past. All right, and to move it from the category of the past into what we call the category of history. See, the past is just a term for everything that happened before the present. Quite honestly, we don't want to know what happened in every instance of the past. Most of it's really boring. We drove down the highway, for an hour and a half today because we live in Dallas where traffic is. You just don't really record that kind of stuff. You record like the highlights is what you do. And then when you get those highlights and you string them together, you can best describe what happened in that event. So what are these 4 conditions that establish historical truths or facts? One is early sources. What do I mean by this condition of an early source? Well, when you're talking about an event that happened a long time ago, if all the eyewitnesses are dead, maybe like 2,000 years ago, they died, that witnessed an event, you want to ask yourself, did anyone who was an eyewitness write it down and record it? And this is just called an early source. All right, let me give an example, right? Some of you are taking notes, like this guy right here on the front row, he's taking notes, or at least he looks like he's taking notes, kind of thing. So we'll just go with you. What's your name? Jalen. He's taking notes, but I see your friend next to you, he didn't have a pad of paper in front of him at all. I don't know what he's thinking, but he's not taking notes, obviously, but maybe he's just really smart. I don't know. I'll let y'all judge, later who's smarter, kind of thing. But what's your name? David's not taking notes, just to point that out to everyone. David's not taking notes, but Jalen is taking notes. Now, here's the deal. David, right, 5 years from now, he's going to be kicking himself in the butt going, dang it, I should have, or Buddha dang it, I should have took notes on that event, that Steve presented on the historical evidence of the resurrection. But by golly, I sat up on that front row and I paid attention. I'm not in that back row, sleeping like I see some of y'all doing, kind of thing. Don't look. There's nothing going on. There's nothing to see there. But David's going to say, 5 years from now, I could just write everything down that I remember. Now, I'm sure he probably could get some of the information down 5 years after the event. But Jaden, who's taking notes as the event is occurring, it's a lot closer to the event, isn't it? So whose notes are you going to prefer? Jaden's or David's? Well, obviously Jaden's, because it's closer to the event. That's what we mean by it being an early source. You follow? This is what I do. I get a doctorate degree on common sense. I mean, seriously, I had to teach you this. It's like, duh. Okay. So what's the other condition? Multiple independent sources is the other condition. What this means is you have more than one source independently of one another recording the same event, and if they record the same thing, then guess what? That's what happened, all right? So let's say you had a friend who wasn't here tonight, and what they could do, since you attended and maybe took notes, maybe say maybe your friend later on, you said, yeah, you should have came to this event. Says, well, I couldn't, I had a class, or I had to study for a test, or what have you. And he said, well, you can take my notes. And he could look at your notes, but if you made a mistake in your notes, is there any way they can tell just looking at your notes? No, what could they do? Well, they could go to someone else, because I see some other guys over here taking notes, or he's surfing on his phone. I don't know. We'll just go with you're taking notes, right? Kind of thing. So he's taking notes on his phone, and if he compares your notes with your notes, and they say the same thing, then that's what occurred. That's what we mean by multiple independent sources. It's like getting testimony from more than one person, is what I mean by this, and multiple independent sources. So early source, multiple sources. A third condition that has to be met is called lacking legendary embellishment. What I mean by lacking legendary embellishment is it has a ring of truth to it, right? It sounds accurate. It doesn't sound made up or contrived, All right. So for example, let's say your friend gets your notes and they ask, hey, what happened in the resurrection event, on Tuesday night at UTD? And you said, well, it was sort of strange. Steve got really crazy, stripped down to his skivvies and got drunk on vodka, which is not too far-fetched for UTD, kind of thing. But just be honest here. That probably didn't occur at a Christian event during Res Week here at UTD campus. So that sounds a little what? Unreasonable, made up, or contrived, right? But if you said, well, he talked about the resurrection, that doesn't sound made up because that's what actually was scheduled on the event, on the brochure. I mean, that's why you showed up. It's like, oh, we're going to learn about the historical evidence for the resurrection. That doesn't sound, so it has a ring of truth to it. It doesn't sound embellished or made up. The fourth condition is there's no other compelling and competing story. This one is saying that if two people say the same thing, that's what occurred. But if two people say different things, then you don't know what happened at the event. All right, does that make sense? Now, what makes a competing story compelling? What makes a competing story compelling is that competing story must be early, multiple, and lacking embellishment as well. You follow me on this? So these are the four conditions that have to be met in order to establish what we call historical truths. It must be early, very close to the event, by eyewitnesses is the most desirable. It needs to have multiple sources, more than one individual saying the same thing about the event. It needs to lack embellishment, sound true, not made up or contrived, and there's no competing compelling story against it. Does this make sense to y'all? This is how historians do their job. This is how historians uncover their clues. Now, to really establish this, because I've been very, very theoretical at this point, let's do a little exercise, all right? There's an event in American history that we probably all learned if you went to school here in the United States. What is this a picture of? Can you tell what this is a picture of? Yeah, you said it. George Washington doing what? Yeah, chopping down the cherry tree. You even see the little axe on the ground, right? Now, as you recall this event, as you were taught, like probably in elementary schools where you learned this, is that George Washington got an axe, right? And what does a kid want to do? I mean, look at, I don't know why, this is his play clothes, by the way. I don't know, I mean, seriously, I hate to see what his formal outfits look like, kind of thing. But this is play clothes where he chops down, cherry trees. And any kid that gets a sharp object, what do they want to do with it? They want to cut things. I know this. I have two boys. And I remember my oldest son, Ethan, when he gave him his first knife when he was 10 years old, which my wife questioned the wisdom of it that day. And quite honestly, as I look back, she was right. And when I gave him his knife, he said, well, Dad, what do I do with this knife? It was just a little Swiss Army knife, like the multiple, tools on the Swiss Army knife kind of thing. And I said, well, you whittle wood, son. You whittle wood. And he says, oh, okay. And he goes over to the coffee table and just like, jar, 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 jar. I'm like, whoa. And he goes, Dad, it's wood. What's wrong? And it's like, no, the wood outside, kid. Wood outside. Oh, my gosh. What was I thinking? So kids, when they get sharp objects, they want to cut things down. And that's exactly what George Washington did. He went and chopped down his dad's cherry tree. And his dad comes home. He's all hacked off because it's his prized cherry tree, and he goes off because it's 1700s, pre-United States, America, and he says, "Who thou now cut down thy cherry?" Because that's how they talk back then, right? Kind of thing. And what does George Washington do? He confesses. He tells the truth. He says, "I cannot tell a lie. It was I." Now here's the deal. Let's apply the four conditions that I just taught you of early source, multiple sources, lacking embellishment, and no competing story against it. Let's see if this story matches those four conditions. Some of you are going to be a little disappointed. Okay, so you're like, oh my gosh, I've been lied to all my life. No, don't go there, kind of thing. But what's the first condition? Remember the first condition? Early source. Where does this story come from? Anybody know? Well, maybe. Don't worry about it. You're not mic'd. So I'll just tell you. This actually comes, I was nerd enough to actually find this out. This is pretty bad, right? It comes from a book called On the Life of George Washington by Parson Mason Weems. And it was written in like the 1830s. Now, what's problematic about that date? A little bit after George Washington, he died in 1799. If you want an early source of George Washington's life, you can get earlier sources like his own diaries, his letters, his letters that his parents wrote, kind of thing. So it doesn't meet the first condition. So this is not very good for George Washington chopping down the cherry tree story. What's the second condition? Multiple sources. Is there any other source out there that has the same story of George Washington chopping down the cherry tree? And there isn't. There's no other source out there that corroborates this story of him chopping down the cherry tree. So it's not multiple, it's not early. And then the third condition. What's that third condition? Yeah, lacks embellishment. This story, guess what, sounds embellished. How do we know it sounds embellished? Well, first of all, when a 10-year-old is about to get in trouble, what are they going to do? Tell the truth? Yeah, they're going to lie. That's exactly right. I know this because I have 2 boys, and guess what they do when they're about to get in trouble? They're going to lie. I remember my other son, Josh. I can, tell on them all I want because they're not here tonight. But when my young son, Josh, was in kindergarten, they would send him home, and they'd have like a little behavior chart in the notebook. Y'all remember these parents, And they'd put little smiley faces if you had a good day, and you love the smiley face. I mean, who liked the smiley faces, in elementary school? Love the smiley. What's wrong with you? I guess y'all didn't get much smiley faces. That's why your hands aren't up. It's like, I was a bad little boy, kind of thing. But no, we got the smiley faces if you have a good day, and that's what you want to see as a parent, a little star, a little smiley face, something like that. One day I open it up, and there's no smiley face on that day. It's got all this handwriting from the teacher, and that's the last thing you want to see is handwriting from the teacher. Because when a teacher takes her time to write, it ain't good. All right? How do I know this? Because I'm a teacher, right? Okay, when I'm sending an email home, it ain't good, kind of thing. And it says on there, during recess, Josh went up to one of the classroom windows and banged on the window and would run off, hide, come back, bang on the window again, run off, and come back and bang on it again. I'm like, dude, seriously, what is wrong with this kid? So I look at Josh, little kindergarten, remember? What was that like 5, 6 years old, something like that? Cute little kid. He was cute. I don't know what's happened to him now, but he was a cute kid back then. No, I'm just kidding. He's actually really good looking because he looks like me. So anyways, what's funny about that? I don't get it. But anyways, I'm sitting there and I go, Josh, is there anything that happened today you want to tell me about? Now, in a 5-year-old mind, he begins to think, which is not really smart for 5-year-olds, right? And he looks at me, and I could see the wheels spinning in his head as he's sort of like looking at me. He says, my dad wasn't there at recess. He didn't know what happened. And he looked at me and says, no. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have a smart one. What's wrong with this kid? And I said, Josh, look, if you're lying to me, it's going to be a lot worse if you would just go out and tell me the truth. And I said, so do you have anything to tell me? He goes, no. Look, why don't you go think about it for a little bit, and if anything comes to mind, why don't you come tell me? And he's like, okay, and he goes off and he starts playing in the backyard. He thought he's off scot-free, right? Well, about 10 minutes later, yeah, exactly. About 10 minutes later, he comes back. Those wheels that were spinning his head, they come to a grinding halt. He's like, oh, Dad has the behavior chart. And so he comes back and he says, Dad, and you can see a little 5-year-old little tear coming down his eye. He says, Daddy, I might have banged on the window a little bit. And I'm like, oh, son, don't ever return to the scene of the crime. No, I didn't say that. Seriously, when kids get in trouble, what are they going to do? They're going to tend to lie. Now, do they always lie? No, sometimes they tell the truth. Because I have another son, Ethan, the one I gave the knife to. Remember him? He's like a perpetual truth teller. You've heard of perpetual liars, right? He's like a perpetual truth teller. I'll say something like, oh, yeah, that parent over there. And then he'll hey, my dad said, and I'm like, no, don't tell that. Kind of thing. Don't say those kind of things. It's like, you got to be careful what you say around my older son, Ethan. He's a perpetual truth teller. I remember one time I sat down in the living room, finally getting the boys situated, and they're playing in the room. I was going to sit down, finally read, and I hear this, bam! And then Josh starts crying, and Ethan comes running into the living room, and I'm about to get up and say, oh, and he says, Dad, I've hurt Josh, but it's okay. I've spanked myself. I don't know, but that's sort of weird, but some kids can tell the truth, right? So not just because they're going to get in trouble doesn't mean they're always going to lie. They do tend to, but sometimes they tell the truth. But how did George Washington tell the truth? How did he say? I cannot tell a lie, it was I. Who stinking rhymes confessions, man? Seriously, what's this 10-year-old kid thinking? You know what, I'm about to get, punished. I'm going to rhyme it, man. We'll put it to a ditty. That's what I'll do. No, this sounds embellished, doesn't it? right? Not early. It's not multiple sources attesting to it and corroborating the event. It sounds embellished at best, and you really don't have to look at the competing stories out there because it doesn't meet the first three criteria. So, sorry to burst anybody's bubble, this probably didn't happen, okay? But this is how historians do their job. They find their clues by early source, multiple sources, lacking embellishment, and no competing story against it, all right? That's how historians do their job. Now, given that, what facts can we know about Jesus? Well, there are four historical facts or truths that have been established by these four conditions that the vast majority of historical scholars have agreed to, right? In fact, I will give a little acronym to help you remember it. The first fact is burial. The second one is E, empty tomb. Then A is for appearances of Christ, and then T is for the transformation of the disciples. Notice the little acronym. Yes, please tell me. Yeah, beat. Jesus beat death. So there are four facts that if you can just remember the acronym BEAT, you can remember these four established facts, which, by the way, I'm not like saying this is what theologians and pastors believe. I'm telling you, this is what historians have come to believe, both Christian or non-Christian, Jewish, Islamic, secular and Christian historians have established and believed these four historical facts. So let's go through each one of these facts. The first fact is the burial fact. All right, what do I mean by be burial? This is what I mean. After Jesus died, he was buried in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea. All right, so those underlined words, died, buried in the tomb, that's what I mean by the phrase burial. All right, so how do we know Jesus died and was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea? One, we know Jesus died because Roman soldiers are expert at what? Killing people. That's what they're trained to do. They know exactly how to, thrust a sword into the torso of their enemy, twist it just so, rip it out so the entrails will fall onto the ground, and they will, do away with their enemy, not have to deal with it. They know exactly how to kill. In fact, their chosen method of capital punishment was crucifixion. Crucifixion back then in the Roman Empire was like the electric chair or, in the Old West, hanging, the guillotine during the French Revolution. It was their method of capital punishment. And they were trained to do it well, right? They knew how to kill someone. They knew how to implement just the right amount of torture and pain and suffering on the individual, but also ensure death of the individual. In fact, they had an incentive program. If you didn't kill the person via crucifixion, then the Roman soldier who didn't accomplish it would receive the crucifixion. And that's quite the incentive program. I thought about implementing this as a homework policy. If you don't turn in your homework, you're going to be crucified. But they just said, I don't want to be no homework. But they said, we're not going to have any students either. So okay, don't do that. All right. So Roman soldiers are expert to death. So we know he died. Another thing that tells us we died is there's this journal, all right, called the JAMA Journal. JAMA stands for the Journal of the American Medical Association. Has anybody heard of this journal? Right? A couple of us. Anybody going into medicine or have family members going into medicine? The American Medical Association is the most prestigious, probably medical guild in the United States. And they produced this very prestigious peer-reviewed journal called the JAMA Journal. And in 1986, they published this article called On the Physical Death of Jesus, where they took one historian and two medical practitioners, a doctor and a medical practitioner, and all they did was examine what happens to a body when it is crucified. Now, we know the details of crucifixion, not just from the Gospels, but from other historical sources outside of the text, like Josephus, who is a Jewish historian during the Roman Empire, in its reign, and he recorded in detailed, points what happened to someone when they're crucified. All right, and so what this journal did, and this article on the physical death of Jesus did, is they looked at the process, not even really theologically or spiritually, but only medically. What happens to the body medically? It's online. Just type in JAMA on the physical death of Jesus. You could read it today. They got all these graphs of what happens to the body. And I'll just be quite honest, I don't understand the article because I'm not a medical practitioner. Right? So, I mean, it's got all this complicated jargon and everything, and it's very, very precise. But this is a peer-reviewed journal. They had to submit it to referees who read it, and they said, this is a good article, publish it. It was published in 1986, and you know what the article included? Jesus died. Right? Surprise, right? But this is, now notice something. This is now the medical experts declaring if someone is crucified like Jesus was crucified, he is going to die before he's removed from the cross. Now, they're not really sure how he died, like asphyxiation, or something like that, or maybe the spear plunging into his side, but he was dead before he was removed from the cross, was their medical opinion. Are you following me on this? So we know Jesus died. But what about the burial of Jesus? How do we know that he was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea? It's found in two very early sources. Now remember, we need to have an early source and multiple sources. And when I talk about the Gospel of Mark in the letter to the church of Corinth, which we call 1 Corinthians, these are not the same source. Though some of you might have a Bible or have read a Bible and it's one book, but you have to understand the Bible is not a single authored text. It's more like an anthology of writers. And each one of those books in the Bible, like Matthew, that's written by Matthew. Or Corinthians, that's written by Paul. And they circulated as letters and documents in the Mediterranean world in the 1st century and 2nd century. And it wasn't until really the 3rd century, some Christians sort of began to gather these documents together and put them in one source, which now we call the Bible. So when I talk about different books in the Bible, each one of those are a different source. So Mark talks about in chapter 15, 42 to 47, that Jesus died, he was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. And Mark is the earliest gospel written according to the scholars. It was written before Matthew and Luke and John, Mark being the earliest gospel itself, probably about 30 to 40 years after the life of Christ. All right, 1 Corinthians 15, 3 to 5 also attests to the death and burial, that he died and was buried in the tomb. And so now we have two different sources, both early, which by the way, 1 Corinthians 15, 3 to 5, scholars have determined that those three verses, 3, 4, and 5, date within 5 to 10 years of the life of Christ. That's unbelievably close to the event. All right, now some of you are like, wait, 3 to 5 years after the event, that's not close at all. All right? I mean, seriously, wow, I'd want something a lot closer than that. Well, compare it to other ancient sources. Like for Alexander the Great, the earliest written biography of Alexander the Great is 300 years after his life. Does anyone question the historicity of Alexander the Great? Even though the earliest biography is 300 years after his life. The earliest biographical information we have of Muhammad is 120 years after his life. Are you following me? Tiberius Caesar, the Roman emperor during Jesus' day, the earliest biographical information we have from him is 70 years after his life. So 3 to 5 years, that's like on top of the event. Now seriously, some people are like, well, wait a minute, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast 3 to 5 weeks ago, much less 3 to 5 years ago. Well, we're not talking about mundane events like what you had for breakfast or what clothes you wore, for your senior year, graduation ceremony, or something like that. You're not going to remember those kind of mundane kind of details. We're talking about details that make an emotional impact on individuals, like when you abandon your career as a fisherman, a tax collector, or what have you, and follow a guy for 3 years, and then he's brutally killed through capital punishment of crucifixion. That's going to make a marked memory point in your brain, isn't it? And it's not like these guys just forgot about it and didn't talk about it for 3 to 5 years. 30 days later, they're preaching the death and burial of Jesus and then the resurrection day after day. And one of the keys to memorization is what? Repetition. Right? If you repeat something often enough, you're going to remember it. And all of you know this because you all remember your name, don't you? I mean, when I say David, you're just like, oh, it's like a dog, it's like, God, I'm not comparing you. Well, I just did. I'm sorry, David. I compared you to a dog, kind of thing. But I mean, seriously, I got this dog named Kipper. Oh my gosh, I got a dog named Kipper. I just realized that, and he comes to Kipper sometimes, because I keep using the name over and over and over again, right? So when you have an event that makes a marked, point in your brain, you're going to remember it. All right, let me give an example of how you can remember an event that happened a long time ago. I remember my first son, Ethan, all right? He's 14 now, okay? 14 and a half. But I remember the day of his birth like it was just like yesterday. You know, I remember my wife, she was pregnant, first time she was pregnant, you know, with our first son. And she was not feeling too well, and she was developing this condition where she was having some water retention. And she went to the doctor and he says, you know what, we need to induce labor. I said, really? Induce labor? What do you mean induce labor? He said, well, we can inject her with some kind of drug and it causes labor pains to go in. So you can pick his birthday. I said, awesome, October 5th. Let's do that. You know, I like October 5th. Nothing else is going on October 5th. You know, it's a little before Christmas. It's a little after summer. You know, that's a good birthday. So we go in. My wife, we're going in, and she's like, got all this makeup on and looking. And of course, you know, when you're preparing for birth, you know, with your wife, they make you watch these, you know, videos. You know, and I'm just like preparing. I'm like, oh my gosh. They say it could last up to 25 hours. I'm like, 25 hours? Oh my gosh, that's insane. So I like bring my Xbox, you know, and all this kind of stuff. So I got to pass the time, you know, kind of thing. Don't tell my wife that, you know, kind of thing. No, that's on video, sorry. You know, kind of, so I'm like, sitting there, I'm like, you know, this is going to take a long time. So they induce labor. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning. I don't know why they always start so early in hospitals, but it's always in the morning, 6 o'clock. She's going to go all natural. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what she did. She went, oh, about 2 hours in. And she's like, give me the epidural. And I'm like, give her the epidural, you know, because she's like cussing in other, you know, religious terminology, you know, kind of thing, you know. And I'm like, come on, you know, give her the epidural. She gets this epidural, you know, and then she's about 30 minutes later, she's feeling really good, you know, kind of thing. And she's like, man, and so ladies, take the epidural. I'm telling you, take the epidural. You know, and so I'm like, dude, this is awesome. You know, listen to some music, you know, play an Xbox. And she's like, what are you doing on Xbox? You know, kind of thing. And so, no, I got like another 20 hours, you know, come on. You know, and so the nurse comes in, they come in like every 30 minutes, checking on you, checking on all this kind of stuff. And, you know, and the labor pains and how far. And she walks in and she just stops. And she goes, Angela, are you pushing? Angela's my wife's name, right? So she goes, are you pushing? And she goes, no, I'm feeling good, you know, kind of thing. And I'm like, what? Pushing? It's like 2 hours, 3 hours in, something like that. And she said, you need to stop pushing. I'm not pushing. I said, let me go get the doctor. She leaves, she goes to get the doctor. Doctor comes, she's still like in her street clothes. She just like showed up for work, you know, like an hour and a half we came in, you know, kind of thing. And she's like whistling, and I could see her walk in, and right when she walks in, she examines the situation, she just stops. And she says, Angela, give me 30 seconds. I go, 30 seconds? What's she need 30 seconds for? And she's like putting that doctor smock on, you know, those little sleeves. And she's like, give me 30 seconds. And 15 seconds. And I'm looking at the doctor, I'm looking at my wife, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my son's coming out and going to hit the floor. I'm going to have to catch him. And I tell you, if I catch him, I'm asking for a discount. If I'm doing all the work, why am I paying the doctor? You know, so I'm like, okay, and so literally, the doctor goes in and catches my son without her arms and hands going all the way through the sleeve of the doctor smock. And I'm like, dude, that's got to be a discount, man. Seriously. You didn't even get fully dressed. You know, come on. You know, so she gets the doctor and she pulls, you know, Ethan comes out, and I look at him, I'm like, oh my gosh, he is so ugly, put him back in. He's not done. You know, I mean, if you've ever seen a baby come out of the womb, they are not good. They're like weird colors, you know, the head all misshapen going through the birth canal. And I'm like, dude, man, he is a mess. And I said, no, it's okay. It just hasn't breathed yet. And they sort of take all the liquid out of his lungs, and he starts breathing, all this color rushing. Okay, he's good. I think I keep him. But I'm keeping the receipt. You know, I'll bring him back in 30 days if I don't like it. You know, kind of thing. I don't know if you can actually do that. You know, but anyways, they said, would you like to cut the umbilical cord? I said, sure. So I go in and cut the umbilical cord, and they go, no, not there. Yeah, some of you are going to get that tomorrow. I almost had a girl, you know, kind of thing. She says, not there. So I cut, you know, yeah, there we go. Someone just got it. You know, it's like going to periodically hit some of y'all a little later. You know, it's going to be awkward here in a moment. You know, but I cut the umbilical cord, and I go, there's my son. And that was 14 and a half years ago. And I remember just like it was yesterday. I mean, all of that occurred, right? Except for the Xbox. I really did do the Xbox. You know? Totally insensitive. Don't do that, guys. You know, kind of thing. And so that's how we know an event can make an impact on people. And so Jesus dying and being buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, these are very early sources. And there are multiple sources saying the same thing, that he died and he was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. So we've met the first two conditions, early source, multiple source. What's the third condition? lacking embellishment. Does it sound embellished? Jesus died and was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Does that sound embellished or made up? No. What do we do to people that die today? We bury them in a tomb, just like they did to Jesus. It doesn't sound embellished at all, right? So this doesn't sound like an embellished account whatsoever. In fact, the figure Joseph of Arimathea is very unlikely to be a Christian invention. Because Joseph of Arimathea in the text was said to be a member of a very prestigious group of Jews called the Sanhedrin. This is the high council, sort of like the Senate of the Jewish people in religious terminology, in a religious context though. And so they said Joseph of Arimathea was part of this Jewish Sanhedrin. And if there was no Joseph of Arimathea, what would the Sanhedrin be saying to the Christian message of the resurrection? They'd be saying, who are you talking about, Joseph of Arimathea? There is no Joseph of Arimathea on the high council. You made this up. Or if there was a Joseph of Arimathea, but they really didn't bury him in his tomb, what would Joseph of Arimathea be saying? What are you talking about? There's no Jesus in my tomb. Because these were family tombs. And only rich people could afford family tombs, where they would carve them into a cave and put a little rock in front of it, because they would always come back to it and bury their whole family group there, is what they would do. So this is a very common practice in the first century Jewish world. So Joseph of Arimathea, unlikely to be an invention. So it doesn't sound, it's early, it's multiple, it doesn't sound made up, and there's no competing story against it. And that's why John A.T. Robinson, a Cambridge historian, said, in stating that the burial of Jesus in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea is one of the earliest and best attested facts about Jesus. So that's the first fact. All right, now I want you to notice something. All I'm doing here is saying, what are the facts? What are the clues that we can uncover historically through the historical process? You follow me on this? So that's the first fact. Now there's 4 facts. There's beat. What's E stand for? Y'all remember? The empty tomb. So let's take a look at the fact of the empty tomb. What I'm saying by E, empty tomb, is this. I know this is a lot for y'all to remember, but Jesus' tomb was found empty. I know that's a lot to ask of you to remember, but you're college students. I think you can do it, all right? Or at least some of you are college students, kind of thing. But anyways, how do we know Jesus' tomb was found empty? Now, before I go into the evidence of why we know the tomb was found empty, I want you to notice what I'm claiming. I'm not saying why it's empty. There's lots of reasons it could be empty. It could be that they stole the body, they went to the wrong tomb, that Jesus rose from the dead. Those are a bunch of different reasons why the tomb could be empty, but I'm not trying to explain why. That's solving the case prematurely. I got to get all the clues in first, don't I? Get all the facts lined up. So all I'm saying by empty tomb, that Jesus' tomb was found empty, is the following. We're just trying to determine what is the case, not why it's the case. So why do we know the tomb is empty? It's again attested in very early information. In 1 Corinthians 15:4, which dates within 3 to 5 years of Jesus, where it says Jesus died and was buried in the tomb, and then he rose again. And that verse transition right there implies the tomb being empty. Mark 16:1-8 talks about the empty tomb being found by a group of women followers. Matthew 28:11-15 also attests to the empty tomb. And these are 3 different sources, all very early, dating within the first century. The same century that Jesus lived. So we have an early source, we have multiple sources, and not only that, the earliest Jewish response to the resurrection story admits to the empty tomb. What's the earliest Jewish response to the resurrection story? The tomb is empty because the disciples stole the body. That's what it says in Matthew. Now think about it. If the disciples stole the body, that makes the tomb what? Empty. And that's all I'm trying to establish today, right now, is the tomb was found empty. Well, not why. I'm not trying to explain why it's empty at this point, but that it just was empty. And when you have the first Jewish opponents to the Christian message of the resurrection admitting to the empty tomb, then guess what? The tomb was really found empty. The empty tomb was discovered by women as well. And this is unlikely to be an invention. This is where it doesn't sound made up or contrived. Now, think about it. If you made up the empty tomb narrative, you fabricated it, the last people you would have find it in the first century Jewish world is women. Why is that? What do you think the status of women is in the first century world? High or low? Yeah, it's pretty low. In fact, women actually reside at the lowest rung of the social ladder. A little bit more than property and slaves is what it is. It's a very patriarchal society at that time. In fact, it even says they have rabbinic expressions that say, "Woe is man, blessed is the man whose children are male, woe to the man whose children are female." They even wouldn't allow women to give testimony in a court of law. Now think about it. If you're going to make this story up, who would you have find it in this first century patriarchal world?
Chief priest.
Yeah, men. That's who you'd have find it, not women. But the fact that they recorded that women found it is evidence that they're telling the truth. It's actually another kind of criteria called the criterion of embarrassment. Because who wrote the Gospels, men or women? Men wrote it. Now, what man in his right mind is going to make up a story that makes them look foolish? I mean, if I'm going to make a story up, you know what I would do? I'm just saying it like it is, right? If I'm making up this story, I'd just say something like, "And on that third day, I marched down to that tomb, and I pushed those sissy guards out of the way, found that Jesus was risen from the dead. He commended me on my great faith, and I went back and comforted the weeping women." That's what I'd say if I'm making the story up. But here's the deal. When you lie, do you lie to make yourself look good or bad? Yeah, that's the point of lying, right? No one lies, "I'm going to make myself look like a moron." No one does that when they lie. When you lie, you make yourself look good. These stories make the writers look bad. And when it makes them look bad, it's because they're telling the truth. Does this make sense to y'all? The criterion of embarrassment. So it's an early source, it's in multiple sources, it doesn't sound made up, and there is no empty tomb competing story against the empty tomb narrative out there. So let's go to our third fact. The third fact is the appearances of Christ. What I mean by this is on multiple occasions and under various circumstances, different individuals and groups of people experience appearance of Jesus risen from the dead. Now, the operative word in that sentence is right there. Experienced appearances of Jesus risen from the dead. Now, I'm not saying what the appearances were. I'm just saying there was some type of an experience of some sort that these groups actually experienced together, right, as individuals and as groups. Right? It might be that they hallucinated. And if they hallucinated, guess what? That's an experience, isn't it? Maybe they had a vision or a dream. Maybe they're lying about it, I don't know. Or maybe they really did experience a risen Jesus. But I don't want to get to solving the case prematurely. I got to establish the facts. So how do we know that these groups and individuals had experiences of Jesus alive from the dead? Well, this fact that we're looking at in the acronym BEAT, B-E-A-T, is the most attested fact that we're going to examine tonight. It's found in Matthew, it's found in Mark, it's found in Luke, it's found in John, it's found in Paul's writings. There's 11 different appearance accounts in the New Testament texts. So very well attested, very early accounts, at least with these 11 different appearances under consideration. In fact, Gerd Ludemann is a professor at the University of Göttingen in Germany. He is not a believer in the resurrection. He's actually skeptical of the resurrection, doesn't believe miracles can even occur. But he is one of the top experts on the historical Jesus. And this is what he says, not believing in the bodily resurrection. He says, and concludes in his work, that the appearance narratives are historically certain. Notice that language. You can't get stronger language in historical terms. That they're historically certain. Now, he doesn't believe in a bodily resurrection. How does he explain the historical appearances of Jesus to these disciples and groups and individuals? He thinks that they're visions, okay? And he might be right at this point. We just know that they had some type of an experience. So it's early, it's multiple, doesn't sound embellished, and there's no competing story against appearance narratives in the text itself. And even skeptics like Gerd Ludemann, who don't even believe the resurrection, attest to the fact that the appearance narratives are historically certain. So let's go to the fourth historical fact. The fourth historical fact is the transformation of the disciples, or that the disciples were radically transformed in their belief that Jesus rose from the dead. They were willing to die for it. Right? That's a radical transformation. I mean, notice, when Jesus was arrested, what did all the disciples do? When he was arrested, they split and they hid, right? And then like 3 days later, they're preaching the resurrection. Something must have happened. I'm not sure exactly what at this point, but there was a radical transformation in the disciples that they were all willing to die for that belief. Now, I want to point something out. Just because you're willing to die for it doesn't mean what? That it's true. But if you're willing to die for it, then you believe it's true. You see the difference there? It's very subtle, but it's an important distinction. Just because you die for it doesn't make it true, but you being willing to die for it proves that you believe it's true, right? I mean, seriously, who's going to die for something they know is false? You know, so, I mean, no one would do that. You die for things. I mean, most people don't even die for the truth. I mean, if someone came up to me and say, what's today? And I said, Tuesday. If you don't say it's Wednesday, I'm going to kill you. Fine, it's Wednesday. I mean, seriously, that's not a truth dying for. You know, I'm just saying. But if you're willing to die for something, you really must believe it's true, because why would you put your life on the line? I mean, because they're going to get something out of it? Money, glory, power? No, they got death. You know, I mean, seriously. And it's like, dude, they're about to kill me. I don't think this is panning out. Okay, I'm lying. I'm out. But they all were willing to die for it. Look what the disciples faced. They faced the Jewish belief of a Messiah, had no idea of a Messiah being executed as a criminal. Because that's what happened to Jesus. He's hanging on a cross. That's the form of capital punishment. I mean, think about it. That'd be like me coming to you and say, hey, I found the Messiah. He's on death row in Huntsville right now. You ought to worship him. You'd be like, I don't know about that. You got anybody with better credentials, you know, than death row? You know, but that's exactly what happened to the disciples. And then the execution of Jesus exposed him as cursed by God. In Deuteronomy, it states, he who hangs on a tree is cursed by God. Who's hanging on a tree? Jesus on the cross. I'm sure these disciples, being Jewish individuals, would know that Deuteronomy passage and say, whoa, I really missed this one because he's now cursed by God. And then thirdly, they were facing the following. No Jewish belief of a resurrection before the general resurrection of the dead at the end of the world. The Jews had a particular eschatology. And eschatology means study of end times, of that no one rises from the dead until everyone does it simultaneously at the end of the world. And they had no idea of a resurrection before that general resurrection of the dead. So notice, they are politically defeated, they are religiously defeated, and they have been eschatologically defeated. This is a thoroughgoing defeat. But notice what happened to every disciple. Every one of them was so radically transformed for the belief in the resurrection, they were willing to die for it. Something drastic must have happened at some point, because they're all willing to die for it. Yet the disciples came to believe Jesus rose from the dead. They're willing to die for it. Now, just because they believe it doesn't make it true, but they obviously are sincere in their belief. You can't question that. So, given that we know Jesus died and was buried, that the tomb was found empty by a group of women followers 3 days after his death, that there was some type of an experience of Jesus alive from the dead, and the disciples were so radically transformed from the belief in the resurrection, they're willing to die for it, that we have to ask the question, what explains these four facts? So what I've done for you is I've uncovered our clues, our historical truths, that the vast majority of historians actually adhere to. And when I say the vast majority of historians agree to this, I'm not just saying theoretically most historians I've read believe this. There have been systematic meta-analysis on historians that have written on these four events in French, German, and English in the last 35 years, from 1975 to the present, and they have all overwhelmingly adhered to the truth of these four facts. That he was buried, died, buried, the tomb was found empty, the appearances occurred, some type of an experience of an appearance, and the disciples were transformed for the belief in the resurrection. What best accounts for these facts? Now, I've mentioned several of them along the way, maybe resurrection, maybe hallucination, maybe they lied. You know, these are possible explanations. But what we have to do when you have a pool of live explanations or options, you have to have some type of grid or filter to say this is a good explanation and this is not a good explanation. And historians have done this. Historians have established conditions or criteria to establish what's called the best explanation. Historical facts can't have these multiple explanations, but what is the criteria for the best explanation? And there's two that I want to talk about tonight: explanatory scope and explanatory power. What do I mean by scope and power? Scope means it explains all of the facts. Not just some, not one, not most, but all of the facts. Explanatory scope, explain all of the facts is what you need to do. And then the second explanatory criteria is explanatory power, that explains each fact adequately and not in a superficial, contrived, or ad hoc manner. All right? So again, these are sort of theoretical, explanatory scope and power, but let me give an example of how we go through the best explanation. All right? Let's say when you go home after tonight's event, you're expecting your roommate to be there, maybe a mom or a dad or something like that. You know, like when I'm talking to high school students, it's usually like you're expecting your mom and dad to be there. And you drive up and you notice all the lights in the house or apartment are on. And then you notice when you drive up that the front door is wide open. And you walk in and you look in and you walk in the living room and the TV's on. In the back room, all the lights are on, the radio's on in one of the rooms. Then you go to the kitchen looking for your roommate or your mom or dad or whoever's there that you're expecting to be there when you show up. And you go to the kitchen and then there's food cooking on the stove and in the oven. Microwaves cooking, some baked potatoes. And you call out and there is no one in the house. Right? So I've given you all of the facts, right? All the clues. You go in, doors open, all the lights are on, lots of appliances are on, there's food cooking in the kitchen, but no one's home. What best explains these facts? Well, one possible explanation is this. Whoever was cooking in the kitchen was missing an ingredient. And so they decided to go to Walmart, get the ingredient, and then come back and finish up the meal. Now, what clue or fact is explained by them going to Walmart and getting that ingredient? Yeah, why no one is home. What doesn't it explain very well at all? Why the door's wide open? Why they left things cooking? I mean, seriously, when they come home, you probably have a little talk, like fire safety, kitchen safety, kind of issues. You're saying, dude, you don't leave meals cooking unattended. Most people in common sense don't do those kind of things, right? So it explains one fact, why no one's home, but it doesn't explain why everything's open and left on, and endangerment, right? Kind of thing. So that has explanatory power for one fact, but it doesn't have scope, does it? So let me give another explanation. And I'm going to guarantee this explanation explains all the facts. The reason no one's home, all the lights are on, there's food cooking in the kitchen, is aliens have abducted your roommate. Right? And they're doing like anal probes on them right now, and they're outer spaceship, kind of thing. Was that too much information? Sorry. But seriously, does that explain all the facts? Well, yeah, it does, because, your alien, probers, they're not worried about your electric bill or fire safety in the kitchen, right? They got some probing to do, kind of thing. So anyways, that explains all the facts, but why is this not the best explanation? What does this explanation lack? Explanatory power, because this sounds what? Made up and contrived. Just like, seriously, aliens? I mean, seriously? Let me give me one more explanation to see if I can get both of these criteria, scope and power. The reason no one's home and everything's left on is when you are gone, your roommate, maybe you had two roommates there, and one of them had an accident. And they had a compound fracture in the arm. You know what a compound fracture is? Where the bone is literally sticking out the arm, and there's blood shooting out, all this kind of stuff. Guess what's going to happen? They're going to drop everything, get them in the car, rush them to the hot emergency room to give them medical attention. And that's a pretty good explanation. It explains all the facts, because who in the right mind is going to say, well, give me a minute, I want to finish up dinner first, then I'll take you to the hospital. No one's going to do that. And then it's powerful, because when someone's in dire need of medical attention, if I went home and that happened to my son, I would drop everything. I wouldn't care. I mean, it's like, get him to the hospital. I want to save him is what I want to do. So an explanation has to have explanatory scope and explanatory power. You follow me on that? So given our 4 facts, burial, empty tomb appearances, and transformation, what is the best explanation that explains all of the facts and each fact adequately? Now, there's a couple of live options out there that have been proposed throughout history that I want to go through. They explain some and not all, right? One is called conspiracy. Right? Conspiracy is the disciples lied and or stole the body. Okay? That's what I mean by conspiracy. Now let's think about it. Let's just go with the disciples lied. Okay? The only fact that is omitted if the disciples are just straight out lying about the resurrection is the burial. Because if they're lying about it and Jesus is actually in the tomb, do you understand how easy this would be to disprove? They would just like, here's his body, you're lying about it. End of movement, right? You know, kind of thing. It doesn't explain the appearances at all because they're lying about it. And definitely if they're lying about it, why would they die for it? So it doesn't explain all the facts. Or let's just say they stole the body and they lied about it. Now if they stole the body, that makes the tomb what? Empty. But if they stole the body, they know the resurrection is a lie. And why would they die for a lie? It doesn't explain the transformation. So conspiracy, it doesn't have explanatory scope at all. Right? It doesn't explain all the facts. Remember, the best explanation has to explain all the facts. Not some, not most, but all of them. So conspiracy doesn't really do it. Okay? Transformation of the disciples is not explained by this. Here's another possible explanation. Hallucination. This is sort of what Gerd Ludemann said in Germany from University of Göttingen. He called it visions. This is the idea the disciples hallucinated the resurrection. Now, to be quite honest, there is a thing called bereavement experiences, where people who lose loved ones hallucinate their loved ones still alive. I lost my dad about 10 years ago. And I remember for about a year, my mom hallucinated my dad coming home from work every day at 5:30, which he did for like 29 years. It's when he came home. 5:30 every day, like clockwork, you know? And I was over there one day, and I saw my mom get up and go to the back and say, Jim. And I'm like, what is she doing? You know, my dad had been dead for about 6 months, and she comes back and said, I heard him come in, I heard him call my name. Now, she had the experience, not me, but bereavement experiences can occur. You follow me on this? But the problem with hallucination, though it might seemingly explain the appearances, what doesn't it explain at all? If they're hallucinating Jesus alive from the dead, then that makes the tomb what? Occupied and not empty. So it doesn't explain the empty tomb at all. If they're just hallucinating it, all the Jews or opponents of Christianity have to do is say, look, there his dead body is, you're hallucinating. But there's another problem with hallucination. Hallucinations are highly individualistic. They're sort of like dreams. They occur to individuals, not groups of people. You follow me on that? I mean, it would be like me waking up this morning, having a dream, turning over and saying, hey, Angela, I had this really cool dream last night. Did you enjoy it? You know, she's like, what is wrong with you? People don't hallucinate the exact same thing at the exact same time. You follow me on that? So it doesn't explain the empty tomb, and it definitely really doesn't explain the appearances, even though superficially it seemingly did. But when you dig a little bit deeper in the explanation, it doesn't at all. Here's one, wrong tomb. The women just simply went to the wrong tomb. They mistakenly went to a tomb that they thought was Jesus' tomb that he was buried in, and he wasn't buried there because that was the wrong tomb. Now, what's the problem here? It explains why a tomb is empty, but what was the first fact? Yeah, it was Joseph of Arimathea's tomb that Jesus was in. They know the location of the tomb. And I'll just be quite honest. If they go to an empty tomb, why would be the first thing they believe is, oh my gosh, Jesus rose from the dead. Look at that, the tomb's empty. You know, I mean, seriously, if I went to my father's grave and it's empty, I'm not going to, oh, Dad's alive. Wonder where he went. You know? I'd be like, who moved his body? What's going on? Oh, I went to the wrong tomb. Here it is. Oh, I'm a moron. Kind of thing. I mean, seriously, that'd be a more natural experience, right? Kind of knows like, oh, resurrection. Yeah. It's the first thing I go to when I see empty tombs. But not only that, they know which tomb it is because it's Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. And remember, John A.T. Robinson of Cambridge said this is one of the best attested facts about Jesus. If they went to the wrong tomb, all the opponents of Christianity would do is say, here's the tomb. You went to the wrong one. End of movement. All right, here's another possible one. Resuscitation. Sometimes this is called swoon, right? But resuscitation is that Jesus survived the crucifixion process, right? Now think about this. The first fact is that Jesus was buried because he was dead. So this explanation denies one of the clues. This is problematic. This is getting the cart before the horse, isn't it? You want your explanations to explain the clues, not explain them away. I mean, what would a trial lawyer be doing if they look at the clues and go, no, that's not true at all. Let's throw all the evidence out. And the judge would be like, how did you pass the bar again? Seriously, I mean, so resuscitation is not very likely at all. But the first fact is we know he died. But even if he did survive crucifixion, what is he going to have to do to get out of the tomb? He's got to move this big old rock out of the way with these nailed pierced hands and feet. And then what's on the other side of this huge tomb rock? These guards who are like, what's going on? Oh, let's take care of business, guys, and finish it off. But let's say he's like Super Ninja Jesus, right? He beats off the guards and he escapes. And he goes to the disciples in his bloodied, beaten, emaciated state, saying, look, I've defeated death. Seriously? Do you think they're going to fall on their face and go, oh, Lord of the universe that's defeated death? They'd be like, dude, defeated death, Jesus? That's a little overclaim. You need some dire medical attention, dude. But how about barely escape it? That's a better way to go than gloriously defeat death. It's not going to evoke worship in these people. So what is the best explanation of the facts? Now, look. There's a couple other explanations out there that I could cover, but quite honestly, they are so bad, I'm not going to entertain them. Like aliens abducted the body of Jesus and put a holographic image of Jesus walking around. I mean, seriously, if they're going to go there, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Seriously, kind of thing. So, I mean, let's just move on to another possible explanation. And let's see if this explanation explains all the facts and each fact adequately. God raised Jesus from the dead. Now think about it. Go through each fact and see if it's explained by God raised Jesus from the dead. If God raised Jesus from the dead, that admits Jesus died and was buried, doesn't it? If God raised Jesus from the dead, that would make a tomb empty, wouldn't it? If God raised Jesus from the dead, that explains why Jesus is appearing alive from the dead. And if God raised Jesus from the dead, that's why the disciples are willing to die for the belief that God raised Jesus from the dead. That's the best explanation. Explains all the facts and each fact adequately. So let's just pause for a moment. I want you to realize what you've just experienced here for a moment. It's been my charge tonight to give the historical evidence for the resurrection. And through the historical process, I have given evidence that Jesus has risen from the dead. And so I implore for you right now, and beseech you this moment, that you ought to believe God rose Jesus from the dead. And it's not just enough to believe that God raised Jesus from the dead. Now Jesus is saying, believe in me. Because remember what he asked his disciples? He asked them this question. And notice what he didn't ask first. He didn't go around saying, hey, did you like my teachings? What did you think of that Sermon on the Mount? Was that a good one? Did you like that? That would be a sort of a common question. Like, for example, after I'm done tonight, I'm going to go to Charlie and go, how did I do, Charlie? Did you like my talk? Not a very controversial question. But what did Jesus ask his disciples? What did he say? He said, who do you say that I am? I am putting that before you right now. Given the evidence, who do you now say Jesus is? Given the evidence of the resurrection and his claims that Jesus has made about himself, that he is God, and he said that in multiple and varied ways, that everyone understood he was making that claim. I mean, people don't get killed for helping people out, raising people from the dead, healing them from sickness. That didn't get you killed. Claiming to be God in a monotheistic Jewish culture, that didn't get you killed. So notice the radical claim that Jesus is making. He is not saying, hey, come follow my teachings. That is not what it means to be a Christian. What it means to be a Christian is to put your trust into the work of Christ on the cross. Because he said, I've come to sacrifice myself for the sins of the world. Because sin brings death. It separates you from God himself. And God looked down and pitied us enough and said, you know what? They can't do anything to save themselves. They can do nothing. Think about it. Can you really believe you could do enough good works to achieve heaven? Think about how bad it is for you. Even when you do good works, you do it for selfish reasons, don't you? I mean, like when you go home and you barely go over the speed limit, you know why you barely go over the speed limit? You don't do it because you want to protect life. You do it because you don't want a ticket. Do you see how bad it is? Even when we all do good works, it's for the wrong reason. You can never do enough to achieve the salvation of being in fellowship and relationship with God again. And God saw that. It says, you know what? They can't do it. So I will send my son, Jesus Christ, to do it for him. So that they don't have to die, and Jesus will die in their place because sin brings death. And you don't have to die in your sin. And you can receive salvation, being saved from your sin, from yourself. And it says in Romans that Paul wrote that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, that phrase Jesus is Lord means believe in the divinity of Christ, that he is truly God. See, you can't just pass Jesus off as a good teacher. I mean, seriously, you really want to say Jesus is just a good teacher when he's claiming to be God? If he's just a good teacher claiming to be God, that's a pretty lousy teacher. But you can't just accept Jesus as a good teacher because you're not even paying attention to what he's saying and what he's teaching. He is teaching that he is God and that you must come to him to receive salvation. And then it says later in Romans that if you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, then you will truly be saved. So I want to give an opportunity. Those that want to receive salvation, to be saved from your sins so you can experience relationship with God, because your works will not give you that relationship. It's only the work of Christ that can give it to you. I want to challenge you to believe it. Not believe that it's true, as I demonstrated tonight, but to believe in it, to make a personal commitment to Christ. And I'm not going to have like an altar call or anything like that. I'm not a preacher or a pastor or anything. I'm just an academic nerd, right? Kind of thing is all I am. I just want you to just believe. You don't even have to say a prayer. If you confess, means truly believe it, truly trust in it, that Jesus is Lord and that God raised him from the dead, then you'll be saved. And what I want you to do, I think it'd be smart to go talk to like Charlie or to some other leaders in the groups, in the Christian groups, and they have little cards here that you could fill out so they could follow up with you to help you along the process, to show what a relationship with God actually looks like through Jesus Christ and Jesus saving you. So I want to just give that opportunity for you to make that decision, because quite honestly, now that you've faced the facts, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it now?